Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. I am your host and constant reader, Scott Daly, and I'm joined by five-time reader, Matt Freeman. Matt, how's it do you?
Do you fine, Scott?
This week on the show, we are taking one final look back at Book 5 of the Dark Tower, Wolves of the Calla. It's our overview episode, our episode where we've slotted in between each books to just give us some time to talk about the book as a whole before we go charging into the next one. We like to do this because sometimes these books take a while to do, right? There were 8 episodes on this one, so that was 2 months worth of talking about this book, and we down into the weeds. And we just like to step out of the weeds and maybe get in like an airplane and look at the weeds from above.
That's right. It's important sometimes to consider each book as a book, consider beginning, middle, and end, how it all fits together. And it does drive me crazy to have to wait an extra week to start the next book. But on the other hand, it's nice to have kind of a breather to settle my thoughts about the book before moving on. So
yeah. I mean, we don't have to just dive right into it. Like we don't normally, both you and I, when we finish a book in the series, we basically start reading the next section right away because it takes that much time to read it, digest it, take notes on it, and prepare those notes into podcast form. So it is kind of like we have a week off because these episodes, much less planned. I think you'd agree with me that we spend less time preparing for these episodes. I really just kind of sat down after pulling all of our mailbag questions, just sat down and wrote some bullet points of things that I wanted to talk about. And then that's really it. So it's like we're taking a break too. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah.
But we're still going to have stimulating, wonderful conversation.
That's right. Of course. Of course.
Speaking of which, let's get into it. Let's talk about Wolves of the Calla.
All right.
So I guess the place I wanted to start with this book is kind of get your overall feelings on the book. How did you like this book as compared to the 4 that came before it? What's your overall thoughts? Are they getting better? Are they getting a little worse each time? What's your feeling on this one, Matt?
Oh, man, I don't really feel like ranking them right now for some reason. But I mean, this one was very fun. I mean, it's each of the books has sort of been its own thing. It's kind of existing in its own little space of genre and feeling. And this one, I mean, I think even from the very beginning, it was evident that this one was going to be a Western, where, the posse of gunslingers come into town and defend the good, honest folk from the bandits. And that's what it was. But of course, in the middle of it, we actually got a very different story. We got Callahan's story, and that was also very cool. Very kind of unexpected, I guess, for me. Like I didn't, for whatever reason, I just kind of figured that this was the quartet. We weren't getting any more people, and it was kind of a pleasant surprise that we were adding a new one. And Callahan's character was great, and I was like pretty, solidly hooked on that story. So, just God, each of these books is so different from any of the others, right? Like, they're all doing very specific, different things. They could each almost just be taken on their own. Like you could almost just pick this book up knowing nothing about the Dark Tower. And
interesting, yeah.
And, like. Not quite, because you'd be missing out on a lot of character backstory and character interactions and wait, what are they talking about moments, but still by itself, it kind of does stand alone as this great story about this, standoff with these robot monsters. And Callahan's story really is entirely self-contained. There's very little about Callahan's story that you need to know going into it. So
yeah, I mean, that has my brain spinning here a little bit, because like I can imagine a version of this story kind of told more from the perspective of the Calla folk and maybe Callahan, in which these unknown characters just kind of walk into our story and we don't know much about them, and we kind of glean more about them as we go through the book, but we don't have their full backstory. And that would be very, Seven Samurai, very Magnificent Seven. That's kind of how those stories work, right? These heroes wander into our story and we don't know a lot about them, and we learn a little bit about them as they go, and then they go on their way at the end or die. they die.
Right.
It's not good. But no, I like that a lot, and I think there is part of that is King is going for that there, that and that really fits considering our book starts. The prologue starts with the Calla, right? We meet the people, we meet Tian, we meet his sister, we meet everyone in the Calla before we really get into our story with Roland and Eddie and the rest of the quartet. So from that perspective, I can really see a version of that story that works that way, and that would be cool. I'd like that a lot.
I think I remember like the first week we talked about the book, I was like, I wonder if this book is going to have a lot more of the perspective of these common people, like looking at our characters, because that would be interesting. And we got a little bit of that. I think we did go back into Tian's point of view toward the end, and I thought that was a great touch.
Yeah. I do think, like, if I have to be critical, like I wish we could have popped in with him more often than we did. Yeah. It's just, at the very beginning and then a little bit near the very end that we get to see from his point of view. But our story really centers on the rest of the quartet, which I guess that makes sense. They're like our main characters or something.
Yeah.
But I do think it would be cool if the book like spent just a little bit more time with the Calla folk, you know?
Yeah.
That's like make your book longer, Stephen King, is what I'm saying here.
Yeah, we needed more digressions into side characters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I from the perspective of a constant reader, someone who's read this book multiple times before, I really enjoyed it on this reread. I really did. I think I said at the very beginning of episode 1 that this is a book, and these last 3 books are books that are a little more divisive amongst the Dark Tower faithful. And I think I was told like immediately after I said that, what the fuck are you talking about? No, you're wrong. And so I'm not going to say I was surprised at how much I liked this book, because I remember liking this book the first time I read it. But the things it's doing and the ways it's doing them, I think on a close read just worked way better on me and way more emotionally on me than they had in the past.
Uh-huh.
And it makes me really excited to read the next 2 books, knowing where those are going and seeing the way this book worked on me in a way that it never had, and knowing what is coming next. It's really exciting. I really loved it. And like, I remember like the thing that I had been thinking this whole time with you as we've been going through these books one at a time, I was like, Matt, just wait, because this shit's going to get fucking weird. It's going to get weird as hell. And I think we're there. I mean, I'm not going to say there's not more weirdness coming. There definitely is. But I think when we have the main antagonists of this book being Dr. Doom dressing, lightsaber wielding, Harry Potter snitch throwing robots, like I think we're firmly into weird. And the weird thing to me is how not weird it felt in the moment. And maybe it's just because I knew it was coming, or maybe it's just because as weird as the series is, King like leads you up to each new weird moment to a point where you're just like, of course it's that. Of course it is.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly. He readies you for it such that it's still a weird surprise and it doesn't really make sense to you, but within it's a mystery that at least you can conceptualize. Like, so for example, this book, I think I mentioned it almost every episode, like Eddie's speech toward the beginning of this book about everything going 19, where he kind of like rants to Roland about how everything's going 19 and this is crazy. And like everything feels weird and fake. And that's just the kind of thing where, King drops that at the beginning of the book, and then it primes you to, be ready for just sort of weird nonsense coincidences. And of course you're always asking, like, what does this mean the whole time? But you're not rejecting it. Like, it's not like if lightsaber wielding robots showed up in Song of Ice and Fire. Right. Sure. Like that would be a different kind of weird. That would just be like did George R. R. Martin go crazy? Like there's no explanation. Like there's no way this is nonsense, right? But in this book, you're like, okay, I don't get why there are lightsaber wielding, snitch wielding robot guys, really, but I get that works in this setting. So
yeah, I mean, when you think about it, when you really just stand back and think about it, why is a lightsaber wielding robot so much weirder than a giant bear robot named after the guy that a book from the guy that wrote Watership Down? Like, the only reason it comes off as weirder to us is because that was like our prime pop culture absorption time, right? Like Star Wars, Harry Potter, like this kind of this is when we were children and teenagers. And so it's like in the books that are coming out in the 2000s now, he's plumbing our pop culture, not the pop culture from the past, right? And that's why it seems a little bit weirder. Because I mean, like Shardik that's book 3, and that's a giant fucking bear robot with the name named after a book. Like, it's not any different, really, but also it is, because it feels different. Like to see the name Harry Potter in this book, and this is something we haven't talked about on the show, actually, that the table of contents in this book is the same font as the table of contents in all Harry Potter books. Like, so if you folks didn't know that, go look at it. Go take out a Harry Potter book and take out the table of contents of this book. It's the same font. It is the exact same font. And it's almost like King is winking at you. Yeah. And that feels like a crazy weird turn. But is it? I mean, like, we had Wizard of Oz last time, and we had Hey Jude in the very first book. Like, it has always been a series of jarring pop culture references. Sure. And I think the only difference is Harry Potter just feels so different and so distinct, because it's this thing that at the time the book came out, and even now 18 years later, that just feels so new and so like broad,
current,
and
it's interesting because I get the way you're reacting to it, but I think for me, when I got to all the pop culture references, I was just like, well, that's bizarre, but I'm sure it'll be explained eventually. Like like that's kind of, I mean, I don't spend hours thinking about how weird that is. For me, the stuff that's like fun weird is just the actual meat of the story. It's interdimensional cowboy helps a cocaine smuggler hide his drugs on a flight. It's it's insane AI train needs to be told riddles. Like, these concepts are insane. These concepts are ridiculous, and they have nothing to do with pop culture references, really. They're just so inventive and creative, and just like, I never in a million years would have thought of this as an idea for a story, much less like that it would make a good story. And that's to me the thing that kind of stands out about the Dark Tower. And you know, in this book, it's sort of the same, where it's like twins. Everybody has twins, and then robots come and steal one of them to use their psychic juices. It's like, that's nuts.
It is nuts. And that is Stephen King. And I think the thing that's remarkable about it is the way in which these insane ideas can weave together to make a continuing narrative. Like, everyone that's read a Stephen King story knows that Stephen King is very good at coming up with crazy ideas that work because they're a great method to tell a story about characters, right? Like, you can read one Stephen King book and get that general skill of his. But the thing that I think is so unique about The Dark Tower is it's this massive, sprawling, epic story filled with at least 7 of those crazy fucking stories and crazy fucking Stephen King ideas. But for some reason, they can, as you said, both stand on their own as independent stories. But the way he tells it weaves these disparate elements together in a way that's so satisfying. Like crazy, insane train riddling and smuggling drugs and 7 samurai with Dr. Doom robots. Like, for some reason, that all can inhabit the same story. Yeah. And I'm just like, okay, sure. It's great. I love it.
You know, this might be like a backhanded compliment to Stephen King, but I feel like this is a giant lesson on what you're willing to overlook if you're having fun and if you're invested in the characters. because like really I feel like if an author, I don't want to like call out anybody's favorite author, but like I can think of several like fantasy authors where I feel like if they tried to be this bold and daring with their plots, it just wouldn't work. And the reason it wouldn't work is they don't really suck you into the world the way King does. They don't suck you into the characters, and they don't give you just this perfectly paced, entertaining, fun journey that he's giving us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think I agree with that. I think there is something to be said if you are invested in the characters, how much of the plot you're willing to overlook. That's kind of ridiculous. And I do think like that is one of the things we've talked about Stephen King and his endings before, and how a lot of people don't like Stephen King endings. Even constant readers have problems with how Stephen King books end. I've always been okay with them, even if they were quote unquote let down, even if they were anticlimactic, even if they were disappointing, because I am so invested in the characters. And that is something that is absolutely true in each one of these books. Like the end of this book is actually, like, if you just break it down, it feels a little rushed. It just kind of ends, right? It's just like we win the day, the last 20 pages, the wolves of the titular wolves are here. We just beat them. Then Susanna's gone, and then the book's over. And it's just like, whoa, okay, that was real fast. Yeah. That was a pretty quick, rushed kind of ending. But it works on me because I am so invested in the fact that Susanna is gone. I am so invested in the fact that Eddie Dean, who has been addicted to the Dark Tower basically since book 2, now looks at Roland and says, I don't give a shit about any of that. I don't give a shit. All I care about is Susanna. I need Susanna. Roland, will you help me get her? And that's such an important character moment for him.
Yeah. Right. I think, well, so I think there's, I guess, 2 reasons for me why I thought this ending was great. I think the first is just that the book is smart enough to tell you in advance several times, almost like a, setup payoff structure. Like this is going to be over really fast. This is not going to be, This is not going to be a giant battle set piece. This is going to be like a scene, and it's going to be chaotic and hectic and quick and bloody, and then it's going to be over, and then that's it. And then that's exactly what happens. And then the other thing I would say is, you could just say, I don't know, it's kind of up for discussion, I guess, but you could say, well, I think the ending actually begins earlier than that, right? I think the ending of the book begins maybe like potentially after Susanna tells them that she knows she's pregnant, and then and that's just a point that I've sort of picked just rapidly going through the plot of the book and realizing like, okay, well, they had a big palaver there, and then after that point there's kind of an inflection where everything is just kind of rolling downhill toward the inevitable conclusion. Yeah. And like you kind of already know Susanna is gone at that point. I don't want to say that because I don't know if I would have predicted that Susanna was gone at that point, but nothing past that point surprises you, right? Like she's just pulling further and further away from the quartet, right? Yeah. So her leaving eventually, it's like, well, that basically started there, if not before. Sure. Anyway, that's one way of saying of conceptualizing, the ending, because really, what is the ending of a book? There's no bright line, right? Yeah. No, I got you, and I think I like that, and I think like there are, looking back, there are so many Susanna is leaving signal flags throughout this book. Like I think, I love the Arizas. I love the plate throwing as a concept in this book. I think it's so cool and so badass. And it's like the first time I read the series, one of the most distinct memories I had is Susanna Dean screaming Ariza while throwing the 2 plates. I thought it was so awesome. But like, if we look at our opening quotes of the story, like Mr. We deal in lead is the Steve McQueen quote from the Magnificent Seven. And then first come smiles, then lies, last is gunfire. Like guns and gunfire and lead and bullets are such an important intrinsic part of this quartet and these gunslingers. And to intentionally kind of place Susanna apart from that, in that she's picked up a different weapon, is telegraphing a lot, actually. Is telegraphing her
migration away from the quartet, and it links beautifully with the force special plate that we've been talking about since the beginning of the story, with the fact that the first time we see Susanna in this book, we're not actually seeing Susanna, we're seeing Mia. And I don't know that's true. I think we see Susanna. I don't remember. But the point is, one of the early moments of this book is Mia wandering through the castle, greedily eating off of these plates on top of this banquet table. And so we're linking the throwing of the plates with the Mia, and it is really telegraphing, I think, she's apart from these guys, she's away from these guys now, and she's going to move further and further away from these guys as she's throwing those plates, as she's breaking those plates, and as she's becoming more and more like Mia. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say, in the book that's coming up called Song of Susanna, we're going to be dealing with the fallout of that change and that separation.
Yeah, that's the next thing I wanted to mention is, I think knowing that the next book is called Song of Susanna did make me suspect at various times, like, first of all, that she might be going off on her own and having her own adventure, and or that this is the one where we're going to get her backstory. And then also, I've noticed, I don't know how like planned out this is by King, but like, the last book was the Roland show. It's the whole Roland backstory.
Yep.
This book, a lot less Roland, vastly more Father Callahan, and then sort of a balance between, I would say, Eddie and Jake, actually.
Yeah.
But very little Susanna, actually. Like, very little Susanna. And so it's like, okay, well, is that because we're sort of saving up for just a big focus on Susanna in this next book? So I kind of always had that suspicion that, like, well, it's okay that we're shortchanging Susanna, because first of all, plot wise, we need her to be out of the spotlight because weird things are happening with her, and then also she's going to get her due in the next book. That was my suspicion.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the next thing I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to talk about lies and honesty, right? This is another quote from the very beginning of the story, an establishing quote that King puts at the very beginning of the book. First come smiles, then lies, last is gunfire. And lies and honesty play a huge part in the ongoing working of the story, for every single one of our characters. And the ways in which you lie to others, the ways in which you lie to yourself, the ways in which that lies fracture and break things apart, and arguably the moments in which lies are necessary. And I guess, you and I talked a lot, and you had, I think, correctly grabbed onto this idea that, if Roland doesn't start telling everyone the truth, like, bad shit's going to happen. And while at the end of the day, they came together just enough to overcome the wolves, I think the end of the book proves that out, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could even argue basically what the Man in Black says, which is like, defeating the wolves is kind of it's great for the Calla Falcon, but it's devastating for their quartet, and that's all he really cares about. So, and who knows what's going to happen to Susanna and how bad that's going to be. So yeah, from the perspective of like their mission, this is a failure. This is actually a setback. This whole book has been, I love the book obviously, but like from the perspective of like the quartet going to the Dark Tower, it's an utter setback. Like they're less, they're further away from the Dark Tower than they were. I mean, in a certain sense. In another sense, I think Roland might understand something that's going to help them get there, but we'll see about all that.
Sure. I mean, it is interesting that, like, there were two missions for the quartet outside of the Calla. It was 1, protect the rose; 2, get back on the path to the beam. And they even speculated that their way out of the Calla is probably going to be through the door. To get back on the path to the beam and back towards the tower. And so they are, it seems, going to leave via the door, however they figure out how to open it. But yeah, their mission is something else now. And they have not secured the vacant lot yet. They did not accomplish that goal. And now Susanna's gone.
I think I'm going to carry with me probably forever this idea of the importance of honesty in the quartet, but like, so like that's the fun idea about a quartet, is like a quartet is just like a fantasy trope way of talking about like a group of people who are tied together and who share in their life together. And like that's like in real life, that's like a family, that's like a group of close friends.
Yeah.
Might be like a team that's trying to accomplish something. That's a quartet. That's a real quartet. That's what King is gesturing at with this fantasy concept. And I think it's, you know, now that it's been pointed out to me, I see how absolutely true it is that like when you have to hold back something, when you have to hold back a secret from a close friend, it just is, it sucks. Like it creates this distance that if you're the one holding the secret, like I was thinking this week or this last month, I guess, for reasons completely apropos of nothing, about like when I was having to not tell anyone that my kid's mom was pregnant with my first child, completely unrelated to anything, Scott.
Well, I've told we can tell everyone now.
I know.
My wife is pregnant, and I've been keeping that secret for a long time. I don't have to keep it anymore.
Yeah, but I had the same I think this similar experience to what you did, where like I'm on the phone with my brother, who I'm extremely close with, and like I'm aware that like there's this really important thing going on with me that I can't tell him, and I feel that distance, and then I realize, okay, well, he can feel the distance too. He just doesn't know why there's a distance. And maybe he doesn't even know that he feels the distance. Maybe he's not thinking like, what's wrong with Matt? But there is something wrong, right? There's something off in the communication that shouldn't be there, right? It's a break in the kef, right? Especially with somebody like a sibling, where you have just you have such a good model of them that if their tone of voice is slightly off, you're like, uh-oh, what's wrong? You know? So the idea of like I don't like keeping secrets in general, but this book is just like really kind of put a nail in it for me. Like that's what sucks about this.
I think my biggest revelation about that in this read through was what we kind of grabbed onto with how most of these secrets were actually unnecessary. That like we realized that like other characters were also figuring these things out. And so you're keeping a secret for no reason. Like Roland has not told everyone he has the dry twist. He has not told everyone that his arthritis is getting worse and will become so debilitating eventually that he won't even be able to walk anymore. He has not told everyone that, but they all know it. And King takes the time to point out every single time Eddie and Jake notice he's limping, notice he gets up on a horse and he's a little strained and it hurts a little bit, noticing the ways in which he is just not up to the challenge. He's not up on his game. I mean, we talked about it last week. Jake is dreaming about this. And it's just, you don't need to hide that from them, but there is something lost there in just like subconsciously, but also I think consciously as well, because when Eddie and Jake notice something, they think, oh, Roland's keeping this from me. And that damages their relationship. It does. And yeah, I mean, I think it is incredible. And like, I tell my wife everything. And I can't imagine having to keep a secret from my wife. I don't think I've kept a secret from her since we've been married. I don't think I tell her everything. So imagine what that would do to every interaction, every conversation, and how that would damage that. How, like, I think Eddie and Susanna's relationship, like, took a hit, and then they got back together by the end. And that's kind of the tragedy of it all, is that in the moment where they kind of joined back together again is the moment immediately preceded by them getting driven apart. Yeah.
Right. It really, I guess I liked it in a way that I hated it, where they agreed that they all agreed to, no more lies, no more secrets type conversation. And then they all just basically continued on with the secrets that they were keeping. And you're just like, man, this is awful. And I keep trying to tie it back to the addiction concept, because I really do see, all these connections. So like Roland being the addict, and in some sense keeping the negative consequences of his addiction from his family, so that they don't worry about him. Right. Like, and I I think
Yeah.
that's in there somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we pointed that out when we got to it, but I think looking at the book as a whole, it's absolutely in there. I mean, that's how Callahan kind of slots into this group so perfectly, right? His story is the story of a man overcoming addiction, almost.
Mm-hmm.
He's an alcoholic. The genesis of his story, the thing he starts with when he starts telling his 200-page story in the middle of this book is, look, I thought I was having a crisis of faith. I thought I was having trouble believing, but really what it was is I was just a fucking alcoholic. I was just addicted to alcohol. That's what it was. And I was looking everywhere else, but that's what it was. That's what ripped me away from my faith in God. That's what ripped me away from being able to fight this vampire. That's what forced me down this path of wandering and no contacts, no friends, no contact, just wandering and lost and uncertain. And it was, realizing that, hitting rock bottom. Like, I think you could probably, I think there's a way in which you could probably line the AA steps on Callahan's journey if you wanted. And I think he'd hit a lot of those beats, maybe not directly, but indirectly, through his journey in this book. I think that's probably there. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the deceit, the dishonesty absolutely slots right into this ongoing addiction metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
I mean, like Susanna, Mia, is literally like sneaking out in the middle of the night to consume her addiction and to feed her demon, right? To literally feed the demon that's inside her without telling anyone. And it's more complicated than that, obviously, but she's becoming another person. But don't you kind of become another person when you drink sometimes? You turn into someone else. I mean, it's all there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I did kind of think some of these threads you just outlined would be resolved in this book, and it's fine that it's not. It's just I would have expected that it would be, but I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes.
I think that it's going to be hard for me if the tower itself is like the ultimate symbol of addiction, the ultimate symbol of draw. I think a lot of these threads just cannot be wrapped up and tied off until we get there, right?
Yeah, I think so, right? Like Roland's ultimate journey has to hinge on, okay, what is his decision at the end, and what does that even mean? What does that question even mean?
Sure.
So,
all right, so we got to talk about Stephen King.
Okay.
The man, the myth, the legend, the person that's in this story now.
Okay.
I mean, Stephen King has always been in the story in some way or another. First, in the very metaphorical sense about this was a book about addiction and characters suffering from addiction and how that's an extremely personal thing for King himself. And then he put himself in the book in fun, shining references. And then this book happened. And not only is Stephen King just throw a throwaway reference, but now suddenly a book he wrote, Salem's Lot, is being read by the character that is inside of it. And this is, we from the very beginning, we had this thing about like storytelling, the power of stories, the power of storytelling. What is it doing? It's always been a very meta story, but this is taking it to a very, very different level. And I just kind of want to get your reaction to it as you look back at this book as a whole and these 5 books as a series so far. We kind of talked about last week about if you were surprised that it went here, but like, what are you thinking? Like Stephen King, like I knew you knew, the one thing you knew was that Stephen King was a character, and that's really all you knew, right? That he was present in his series, but this is how it is. This is the way he is present.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, just we've been building up toward this. We've been building up a world that explains this, right? We have this idea of, okay, it's a multiverse. It's a multiverse connected by doorways and by psychic dream trances, Todash, and by magical orbs. You can travel between worlds, between dimensions, between different sort of parallel alternate courses of history. And then there's also this idea introduced in the Gunslinger, actually, where it's like, the tower is the nexus of size, where it's like it's not just it's not just that there are many multiverses, it's that somehow there's like a hierarchy to the whole thing, where there's like something bigger than all of this that encompasses it. And I don't know what that means yet. I really like, that was just kind of an acid trip as far as I'm concerned. I don't know whether that's going to like come back in a meaningful way.
Sure.
But basically, like, and then of course, okay, so that's all one thing. And then of course there's all of the metatextuality. There's a lot of references. There's all the Lord of the Rings stuff and the Wastelands stuff and the T.S. Eliot and the I'm even blanking on all of the different like direct literary references in the story.
Because there's countless
ones, and all of that is sort of hinting to you like, okay, this is a story where it's entirely possible that this is like supposed to be a fictional story, or maybe these authors are channeling something from this world which is supposed to be real, or who knows what exactly. Like I still like my idea from last week that this is all supposed to be real, and Stephen King is just like a psychic who's channeling the story. That's
secondary creation. I really loved that tangent you went on last week. I think that's a lot of fun.
So I think that, I mean, that's got to be my favorite current interpretation of what's going on here. Of course, it's also entirely possible that Stephen King is God, and he is inventing all of this, and it's a story. But then you get confused when you're like, okay, but when they meet him, they're not meeting Stephen King because Stephen King is a real man. They're meeting Stephen King in the story. So what does that mean exactly? I don't know. Again, like, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if the characters are actually going to meet him, or if this is like, I don't know on what level this actually happens. I just know the one bit of information that he's in the story somehow. So
yeah. And I mean, it's a lot of fun, and I've been enjoying getting to this moment with you. It's one of the things, there were several like signposts I had in my head when we started this thing of like things I can't wait till I get to with Matt, and the realization, the Salem's Lot realization at the end of this book was one of them, and so I was very excited to get there with you. And I think one of the fun things is when you look at the book as a whole, and I think you would have guessed Salem's Lot as the right book if you read it and we were talking about the book as a whole, like right before that reveal, because like if you look at the book of a whole, so much of this book is Father Callahan, right? This is like a 600-page book. 200 of them are Callahan's backstory. And so like it just becomes so much more evident when you're looking at it at the 10,000 foot view that it has to be Salem's Lot, because here's this guy that was entered into, it's from another King story. The first time this is directly happened in the series so far, that we've pulled a name and a character from one of his earlier books and just dropped him in this book. And so Salem's Lot becomes important by default because this is the origin story of Father Callahan. And so obviously it had to be Salem's Lot. Yeah,
right. I think if you leaned on me and just been like, keep guessing, keep going. I would have got there. But
God, it's very hard. It's very hard not to do that sometimes, where I just want to be like, okay. And like, I don't want to lead you too much, but I want to leave a breadcrumb, but I don't want it to be too big of a breadcrumb that gets you there where you wouldn't have gotten there on your own. So it's very tough to balance. Very tough.
And it's like the way I read, I don't know if I'm unusual or totally typical or not, but like the way I read, I just don't think about these things naturally. Like if I were just reading this book on my own, I would just be like, what's the book? What's the book? And then I would just keep reading. I guess we'll find out what the book is, right? Like I wouldn't try to puzzle
you're not
it
like
out.
trying to solve it in real time. That's not how I read either. That's like, I think that's why I like murder mystery stories so much, because like I never guess who the killer is, because I'm not trying to. I'm just like, oh yes, very intriguing. Yes, right. Yes. Yeah. I wonder who it is.
I almost don't want to know who the killer is. Like I don't want to figure it out, because I want to be with the characters when they figure it out.
Yeah, I think it's this really, it's a really difficult line to walk, because I agree. I don't want to figure it out, but I do want to, at the end of the day, feel like it would have been possible for me to figure it out.
Yeah.
I just don't want to actually connect the dots myself.
Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, it being Salem's Lot is like, oh, yes, obviously, right? So, and that's what feels, that's what's satisfying about it,
Yeah.
ultimately.
Well, and what's fun about it is then, like, you have our characters, right? You have our quartet, and you have Roland and Eddie and Jake and Susanna, and they have been these people we've been with this entire time. We love them and we're part of them. And then we introduce this new character, Callahan. And by making it Salem's Lot, by choosing it Salem's Lot book, we're kind of looking at this character, the new member of the quartet, and being like, this guy isn't even fucking real. He just comes from a book.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of like distancing him from the quartet. Like, how much is he part of this? Like is he the only one that's not real, or like you said, is the story based on his life, or is his life based on the story? And what does that say about the rest of our characters?
Yeah.
We don't know.
I feel like King has been walking us up to asking that exact question, because, you know, at first it was Eddie Dean knows about The Shining, and you're like, and you're like, okay, authors do cute stuff like this sometimes,
right?
Like I can think of two other authors that I like off the top of my head who do cute references to their expanded universe, or whatever you want to call it, where like you're not really supposed to take it that seriously. You're not really supposed to be like, well, wait, what are the implications of that? It's just like, no, they're just being cute. It's just an Easter egg for readers, and that could have been just an Easter egg for readers. But then you see, so that's Salem's Lot, and that's Father Callahan. It's not just cute. This is a plot element.
Yeah.
And then you have to think about, well, what are the implications? And the implications are things like, well, all of our characters could be fake. All of our characters could be fictional, sure. like become aware that they're fictional characters. And then what happens, you know? So,
yeah. And to be honest with you, a lot of King's, you know, interconnected, like the Stephen King universe is just those kind of Easter egg things. Like in the book, Dr. Sleep, a character says there are other worlds than these. And like, that's just fun. That's just a fun Easter egg. There are other books where they'll drop Ka, like where you'll be talking to someone and they'll say they'll mention Ka, and the character's just like, what? Like it's fun stuff like that in a lot of these books, and it is no more than just like a fun throwaway like wink for your constant readers. But yeah, what I love about The Dark Tower is it is certainly that. I mean, we had that with The Stand. We had that with the Deadlights reference way back in Gunslinger. But that wasn't enough for King. He wanted to make this series not just those cute Easter eggs, those winking at your readers, those little rewards for your most dedicated fans. He wanted to make it about that thing. And that's what I love about the series so much, and that's why I can't wait to get to these next two books, because I don't think it's a spoiler to say the rest of the story is going to be reckoning with that fact. And what it means for our characters, and what it means for the story, and what it means for the themes of the story, what it means for what this whole thing is really about. Yeah. It's so
I'm excited. Yeah, I'm very excited because there's a few directions you could go in, and each of them sounds fun, but they're quite incompatible. So we can only really take one of the directions that I have envisioned.
I'm really excited to see what you think, where you think it's gonna go. Like, so like if you had to guess right now what Song of Susanna was about, like what is going to happen next for all of our characters in the next book? I mean, do you have any idea? Like I'm really curious, because one thing that I love about King is that like what happens next can seem obvious in your head, and then it almost never is the way the book goes.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so option one is they're in a story, they go through a door, they find Stephen King. They tell Stephen King to write the next part of the story in a way where they find Susanna. That's one option.
Okay.
That assumes that he is God and he can actually make things happen and is not just channeling the story. The other option is maybe they find, I guess for some reason, I'm assuming they find Stephen King in this next book, and maybe that's totally off base. But anyway, the other option is they find Stephen King and they ask him, okay, write the next book, and then we're going to read it, and then we're going to use that knowledge for some shenanigans, or maybe edit something. Or no, he can't edit it. If he's just channeling it, if he's just channeling the story in this other pathway, then at least they have like foreknowledge of certain things, you know?
Okay.
But that said, like, this is supposed to be the Song of Susanna, which means it's a Susanna focused book. So
yeah. I'm
missing
let's ask
out.
the question.
Yeah.
Where is Susanna? Mia walked through that door. Where is she?
Well, the door went to New York, and we didn't really see any indication. Oh no, you can change where the door goes.
Yeah, the door can go anywhere.
The door can go anywhere. Well, then the obvious answer is she's in the castle. I mean, the obvious answer in the sense that it's like, where else could she be, right? Where else would Mia go other than the castle, or the like maybe she's gone to the past, Arthur Eld era past, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And she's giving birth to the demon in the deep, deep past, and the demon turns out to be the Crimson King. There you go.
Okay.
Solve the book for you.
Man. You went further than I thought you were going to go. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's all I got for now.
Okay. I love it. Cool. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about before we move on to our mailbag questions? I think this is a pretty good conversation. I guess let's finish on Jake. We haven't talked about Jake very much.
Okay.
And Jake is such a huge part of this book, and we've talked so much about, you know, his change, his growth, his entrance into adulthood, and what that's going to look like. And I'm wondering, what do you feel about Jake at the end of this book? Where is he as a person? He's obviously still changing, still growing. I think there are hints that he has kind of crossed a threshold, but maybe not as clearly as we thought.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my tone in the last episode where it's like, okay, this is it's supposed to be a coming of age, but like there's all this horrible trauma wrapped up in it. Like, this is the most horrible. Like, Roland wanted to give him this sort of final send off to his childhood, and in a certain sense, that was like the most poisoned gift in the world, because what it did is he got to be really good friends with this kid, and then watch the kid be brutally blown apart in front of his eyes.
Send off,
and then have to go on a killing spree of revenge, and then just, like, you know, have 1,000-yard stare while pretending to smoke a cigarette. And you're like, I don't think this was good. I don't think any of this was good for Jake. I think this was all very, very bad for Jake. And yeah,
but I mean, here's what's good for Jake and good for Jake's evolution into gunslinger might not be the same thing.
I mean, if our goal is to traumatize him such that he matches with Roland's level of being a traumatized child soldier, then we're on the way there. I mean, we're like, it's been clear the whole time. Like, okay, so you've pulled the 11-year-old, or how old is he? Is he 11?
No, he's
older.
Gosh. I think he's 11. Yeah. In this book, at least 11 or 12,
something like that. Pulled this kid into this world where he's gonna be trained to be a killer. So, like, we were always going in kind of a dark and questionable direction with him, and this book is just kind of continuing down that path of, like, okay, he's getting more sort of detached and cold and inhuman due to his experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. It's so fascinating because, like, you can compare Jake's journey in this book to Roland's journey in Magus back in the last book, right?
Yeah.
And how this is like, this was his first assignment, his first opportunity to test him, to test being a man. And it was this horrible traumatic experience that changes him forever. So from the Roland perspective, it's like, great, he's right on track. To Roland, I think becoming a man is to go through a traumatic experience that changes your life forever.
I think you're right. I mean, you can even directly compare the okay, so Roland lost Susan, but, like, flawlessly blew away, you know, dozens of armed men.
Mm-hmm.
And here, Jake lost his best friend, but flawlessly blew away all these robots. Like,
yeah, and they lost Susanna.
Yeah, and they lost Susanna. True. So yeah, but it very, very well paralleled, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there, and I think, I don't think Roland. I like. I'm going to preface this again because we get sometimes when we're harsh to Roland, we get some people saying we're unfair to him, which fair. But I don't think you look at Roland and you look at Jake and you say to yourself, I hope this little boy ends up like that man. Like I don't think anyone's doing that, right?
No, I think what you're thinking is I hope that Jake is able to like redeem and pull Roland back from his self-destructive tendencies.
Right. And that is what Jake was doing for Roland early on. Remember, I mean, like when he brings him back into Midworld in book 3 in the Wastelands, that is the effect that Jake is having on Roland. Roland is learning how to love again. That's the big thing about those both book 2 and book 3 is Roland learning how to love again. And it's this really powerful moment, and you're excited about it. And you're like, yes, look at the effect these people are having on him. This book to me is much more, look at this effect that this person is having on all these other people.
Yeah. For sure, right. I think, I pointed out last time, like, I don't think Roland like has a genuine smile the entire book until the very end. And I think that has a lot to do with this idea that for the last couple of books, it did feel like the Quartet was sort of pulling him closer and closer to humanity. And for whatever reason, I guess for all sorts of reasons, this whole book has actually felt like him sinking further and further away from humanity, and maybe, like you said, dragging them with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh gosh, we'll have to see. We will have to see what happens next.
Yeah. The only remaining big idea about this book that I really wanted to hit on that I loved was this focus on the idea of sacrifice for the greater good, sacrifice for the group, putting the good of others ahead of yourself, as a theme, and how it was portrayed in this book, where it's like, look, like everybody who was a coward and didn't want to fight the wolves, like you really get it, right? You're not like you pathetic coward. You're like, yeah, that would be me. if I had little kids, or if I had really anything at stake, including my own life, I'd probably be a complete coward. Especially if everybody else around me was also being a complete coward. I'd just be like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess this is what we're doing. And the idea that you need to stand up for what's good, even though like the odds are quite bad, is something that I actually struggled with. I was like, man, I do like to imagine that I would be TN, but I'd probably be Oberhoser. So
yeah. I mean, I think that's great, and I think Stephen King is the type of guy, and again, I don't know him. I've just read his books my entire life. But I don't know him as a human being, right? I've never met him. I think there has to be a certain amount of ego when it comes to being like one of the most well-known authors ever. But I do think I can see Stephen King, especially when he wrote this book, being the type of person that would be like, shit, man, I'd probably be an Ovenhoser, holster. Like that would probably be me. That's like, and I mean, I don't think he's afraid of tapping into the insecurities he has, into the self-deprecating side of himself. Like, I think that's why Roland is such a wonderful character, because like, if Roland is a King insert, I'm not saying he is, but if he is, Stephen King doesn't think very highly of himself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true for just about every character in this story. Every character where you could make the argument that it is a representative of a side of Stephen King, it's not the great side. It's a self-deprecating, honest human side.
I mean, good writing is always from a place of honesty. Like mm-hmm. there's never been a good book that came from an author who was not being honest about whatever. Mm-hmm. And very often that's about your own like shortcomings as a human being. So, I mean, he doesn't, I don't think King strikes me as somebody with a lot of ego. So I think, I definitely think that like this struggle was something that he wanted to portray fairly, mm-hmm. so that it really is fair to Overholser. It's just as fair to him as it is to anybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think you sit down in front of a keyboard and you ask the central question: how is it possible that a group of people would just let this tragedy continue for hundreds of years? How would that happen? And then you start attaching humanity to that thing, and you quickly find out exactly how it would happen. Well, fear and comfort and
groupthink.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I love about Caliburn Sturgis so much, is that there is something just so real to this community, to this town, and the same people who were terrified and afraid, and didn't want to speak up, like the ability to pull them into this and get them screaming yes and excited for the gunslinger, and then at the very end, like marching down the road singing in triumph, is just the power of hope and another option, and to kind of bump you out of your complacency.
Mm-hmm.
Because change is hard, especially when things have been like, imagine you live, like we all live in a world in which this is the way things are because it's the way things have always been. And there's comfort in that, even in the most horrifying of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And like they talked about it directly, like the devil is better than the devil you don't, because you could try to change things and only make it worse.
Yeah.
Right. But does that mean it's not worth trying to change? Well, this book says no. You just need the encouragement. You need the right people to step up and say, no, we can't take this anymore.
I like to connect this to what you were just saying about paralleling Drake's and Roland's arcs here, because you could also parallel the Calla with Magus. And you could even see this as a kind of much more optimistic and redemptive take on that same concept, because that was a story where a town with definitely some rot at the heart of it ended up burning an innocent girl on the Charyu tree to sort of satisfy their sense of a fairly dark and twisted kind of justice that they believed in, or you could even just say that they wanted to appease the dark god that that they believe exists. I mean, I'm sort of hand waving like Ka and stuff. Sure. Whereas in this book, they were in a certain sense sacrificing to the Charyu tree on a regular basis in the form of just letting the wolves take their kids, but then they decided they didn't want to do that anymore, and they fought and they risked everything to end that cycle.
I mean, it is interesting that in both stories, Roland and his quartet roll into town, and they are the catalyst for change in that town. One in the negative, the other in the positive. And I wonder if this is a reflection of just how much better at the politicking side of gunslinging that Roland has become in the intervening centuries. That he is just like, he can push people towards the right choice much more effectively than he was able to do in Magus. And you could even argue that the reason he's able to do that is because of honesty, because of truth. Because in Magus, he was there under a false name, under false pretenses, skulking around, sneaking. And because of that lack of honesty, the townsfolk were able to be manipulated against him and his quartet. Where in this one, with the exception of like the plan itself, he is honest about who he is, about what he's doing, about what he's going to do, about what he represents. He is honest with these people from the very beginning. And so he's able to bring them over to his side. Yeah,
I mean, quite critically, he never asks anyone in Magus the three questions, right? He never asks them,
true.
He never asks, do you seek aid and succor? He's like, I'm here with the aid and succor. Get in line. And then, kills everyone. So
Yep. Yeah, so it's like the bad team operates in secret. Our heroes need to operate in the light, basically, and when they don't, when they try to do the same kind of, and like, I do think this is interesting, because I'm saying this knowing that like Roland was sneaking and planning and playing castles with Andy and Slightman. I like that is true, but I think the book is saying things about like, when is it okay to tell lies versus when is it the wrong choice to make. And so lies are still told. Roland is still keeping secrets from the Calla, absolutely. but there are different times, and I think he's always honest about who he is and what he represents, and I think that is the most important part to me.
Yeah, I like that.
Cool. I think that is a great place to stop this discussion and head on over to our mailbag questions. So
all right.
Let's do it. You want to take the first one? And then
first one is from Megafire7. They say, what the fuck is going on? Or in other words, they're asking, what is my current overarching theory of the story in this world?
This is fun because I think Megafire is one of our first-time readers. So I on top of wanting you to answer this question, I think Megafire just legitimately wants to know what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, I don't know how much to reiterate what I was just going through, but like, either this is a depiction of like a real sort of multiverse based on different choices creating different possible pathways of existence, and then various authors, including T.S. Eliot, Tolkien, and Stephen King, channel different aspects of this into their works, or Stephen King is God and he created all of this. And then, I don't know how much farther to go. That's as succinctly as I can put it there.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Cool.
I like that.
I mean, what's funny, it's going to be neither of those things. I'm going to be just completely wrong. So
we will find out. Yeah. Next, we have Outrageous Effort 17, who says, I've been listening to Kingslingers since the beginning, but I just now found copies of the audiobook so I can read along. Awesome. That's awesome. Matt, that's what Matt's doing too.
Yeah.
After listening to Wolves of the Calla, I was struck by the idea that there are similarities between it and Wizard and Glass, almost as if they are twins in some way. I was hoping you could explore this idea a little bit in your wrap-up. Well, I think we did a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, it's funny. It did not occur to me until we were having this conversation. So good on you, Outrageous Effort, for noticing that. I didn't until we were talking about it just now. So,
but I definitely think there is absolutely some fundamental truth to that. I think it expands beyond the parts that we were already talking about too. There are a lot of similarities between those two books.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they're both Westerns for sure.
Yeah.
And they both involve Roland and his posse rolling into town, and yeah, I mean, there's probably 24 things that I could pick up that are more minor. Trying to think, there's not really like a Rhea or like a Big Coffin Hunters. I guess you could say, okay, well, the closest thing to that would be like Andy. And anyway,
I think Rhea would be the Andy
in
this, and Slightman would be the Big Coffin Hunters, perhaps.
Something along those lines. Sure.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess the better question to maybe ask at the end of that conversation is, like, why do we think King's doing that? I mean, we've talked about duality and the twin stuff so much throughout the course of reading Wolves of the Calla. Do we think this is something that King did intentionally, that he crafted these two books to mirror each other in that kind of way?
First thing that comes to mind is something, I don't remember when I said this exactly, but something about second chances being a key theme of the story. Where really, fundamentally almost every character is getting a second chance, or maybe more than second chance, like people getting chances. Maybe they don't even deserve a second chance, but they get a second chance. And
sure.
And so in that, in that sense, this could be Roland's second shot at a sort of basically similar situation to the one where he felt like he, lost everything in the previous, the previous time this happened. And I don't know if he feels like he did a better job this time, but at the very end of the story, he does make a very different decision.
He does. I mean, that like, I think we kind of downplayed that because it was at the very end of our episode and we were running late. But yeah, I mean, he basically says, look, I miss Susanna too, but like, we got to go to the tower. And he chooses in that moment to say, okay, Eddie, we'll go get her. And perhaps, I mean, to be cynical about it, perhaps he's finally like clued into the idea that his path to the tower lies through his quartet and he needs all of them to get there, perhaps. So you can be cynical about it, but you could also just make the argument that he recognizes his friend needs this and he's going to help his friend out.
Well, definitely worth pointing out that the way the book ends leaves you with that question. We don't actually see into his head enough to know why did he change his mind. We don't know that. The book doesn't tell us that. So
that is true. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next question from Dark Gazing. They say, many reading lists online for the Dark Tower insist on lots of in-between books and pit stops. I feel strongly that Dark Tower 1 through 7 should be read in sequence, as we are doing, to preserve pacing mainly, but also because I believe where King borrows another part of his universe, he usually provides more than enough detail and context for the reader to roll with. I ultimately say if you're going to do some weird reading lists, save it for a reread. These lists usually agree that the most quote-unquote necessary of these sojourns is Salem's Lot. So, now that you've finished Calla, do you feel that you got enough from just the text regarding Callahan and the beginnings of the story? And how do you feel about these wrong people with their wrong ideas about reading the series wrong?
Matt, what do you think?
I don't feel like an urgent need to go read Salem's Lot, but I definitely will at some point.
Sure.
I've been kind of mentally putting together my post the Dark Tower King reading list of just like, what am I most curious about now? Now that now that I know that King is awesome, and now that I am more curious about his extended universe, and that book is near the top of that list.
Yeah. I want to preface this with the fact that whatever way you choose to read this series is great and good for you, and I think it's important to make your own way and define whatever way you want to read it. I of course, because of the way we're doing this, I agree with Dark Gazing, and I say that these 7 books should be read in order, and then you can go off and do other stuff. And I agree on rereads. You can have fun with it and do fun lists, but I really think this is the way we should read it. And yeah, I mean, I think the worst thing that could possibly come out of this is now the ending of Salem's Lot is kind of spoiled for you, kind of, I guess. You know how Callahan's role in that story goes, kind of. But there's so much more in that story that you're going to appreciate and enjoy. So
it's not the kind of thing that I worry about, really.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, for people who are more concerned with that kind of spoilery thing, it could maybe hurt their enjoyment of that book, I guess. I don't know. I guess, yeah, a lot of people said to me, you're not going to understand Father Callahan enough. And I just don't know if I agree with that. And so do you think you had enough of a handle on who he is as a person from this story that you don't need that backstory?
I mean, we spent 200 pages of his backstory, like you said. It's
sure.
I don't know to what degree of a major character he is in Salem's Lot, but I feel like we probably got as much page space with him in this book as you do in Salem's Lot.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
So I'm
possibly even more in this book, actually. He's one of several characters in that story.
In any way, what is a character? I have an image of who Father Callahan is from this book, and maybe your image, if you've read Salem's Lot, is distinct from that in some ways. And you could be like, well, no, he would, in this situation, he wouldn't do this because in Salem's Lot, he did this thing. And I would just be like, yeah, okay, that's cool, but I don't need that.
Importantly, he's not the same guy. That's the point of his backstory, is for King is connecting the dots between the person he was at the end of Salem's Lot and the person he is at the beginning of Wolves of the Calla. That is what it is doing. Well, we are witnessing the change. And so you kind of do see the person that Callahan is in Salem's Lot at the very beginning of this backstory.
Yeah.
And then you see how he becomes the person we're looking at right now. So I really don't think we're missing anything.
Because it's decades, right?
It's something like that.
Several years, many years of wandering, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's decades. It's many years of wandering.
Yes.
And yeah, by the end of it, you're like, yeah, he's had so many different weird experiences beyond whatever was going on in that book.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, the other salient thing about why I personally just want to read the Dark Tower books in order is because if we didn't, if we had read Salem's Lot before this book, then it would be I would just forget Eddie and Susanna and Jake. I would just forget them. I would just be like, oh, I read about them 8 months ago.
Yeah.
I don't remember them anymore.
Yeah, and that is, I think, why on a reread, I think that's a really fun thing to do, because you already know who they are, you know where the story is going to go, and so it's okay if you take these side trips to read The Stand for a year. But I don't think it's necessary on this read through. And so that's not what we're doing, but we'll get to those eventually.
Yeah.
All right. Next question is from Pear Jane, who says, Matt, what do you think will happen that you really hope doesn't happen? That's a good twist on the prediction questions.
I think Eddie and Susanna are going to die, and I really don't want that to happen.
Jesus. Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
That's my main. That's the main one, and that's kind of been on my mind for some time. So it's not like I just pulled that out of my orifice. I just I've been worried about that for some time.
Orifice, Matt? Gross.
I was gonna say like hat, and then I was like, well, that's not the expression that I want to go for.
So you went with orifice,
and then I was like ass, and I was like, no, you paused too long to say ass. It would be weird if you said that. So I just decided to go for broke.
The inner workings of Matt's brain.
Yeah,
it's a marvelous place in there.
Welcome everyone. Next question. SNAB J94 says, thanks to you guys and your earlier mentions of Taylor and the Wormverse, I was encouraged to read/listen to that story as well and follow along with you guys the whole way. I just finished Arc 9 Gleaming in Ward. Wow. I'm so happy to hear this.
Yeah.
We have one confirmed convert, Scott.
Nice.
My question is, I saw that after you finish reading and analyzing Ward, you interview Wildbow. Will you be trying to interview Cy King when the project is done? Big ask, but maybe he'd be down. Also, I have a question for Matt, which is, what's your favorite of Wildbow's works other than Worm? Because they needed direction to go after they finish Ward. Well, yeah, go ahead.
So for those of you that don't know, Wildbow is a online web serial author. We've talked about this on the show before, but we'll do it again because we converted someone and that makes me happy. He has written 4 and is midway through a 5th web serial that he's publishing online chapter by chapter, week by week. And Worm is his first one, and it's like a superhero story, like superhero deconstruction. Like, it's very, very long, and it's really into character work. So like we've said in the past, if you enjoy Stephen King, I really think you're going to dig it. I really do. We did a whole podcast on analyzing that story as well.
Yeah, that was the one where I was the previous reader. Scott was the new reader. It was basically this format, except flipped.
Flippied. Yep. So Matt, what is his? You've read all of his stuff. I've read Pact, Worm, and Ward. That's all I've read. So I think we can both recommend Pact.
Yeah, I mean,
which is a very different animal.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly recommend Pact. Pact definitely feels a lot like Worm in some ways. It was written immediately after Worm, and it has some of my favorite. I think I said at some point, like, some of my favorite Wildbow things, concepts, parts of a story, full stop, are in Pact. Mm-hmm. There's one specific part in particular, and then Twig is. I think most people who've read all of his work say that Twig is like the most mature and sort of like objectively best, in the sense of like best written, most kind of ambitious in certain ways, but it's very different from Worm in terms of how it feels. And it's his third, and he's trying to do different things, and which none of this is a criticism. It's just like it's quite different from the things that he did before. So all of them I love, and it's a huge amount of reading. Obviously, it's a huge commitment, but Twig was the only one other than Ward, obviously, that I kept up with in real time. And there were so many weeks where I would just be like gutted by what had happened in the story, and I have to like go for a walk, like is that kind of story where you're just so invested in the characters, and then he's so good at like pulling on your heartstrings with those characters that I was just a mess, like, repeatedly with Twig. So
I need to read that book. Just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah, it's you will, and it is great. Like, that's the thing, is like sometimes I feel like saying Twig is his best, but I'm like, well, I can't say that because Pact has these parts of it that I love, and Worm is just its own thing that's like very special to me. So these are all stories that I love a lot. I think Wildbow is a genius. I think he's great, and if I suppose this was a sort of sales pitch, people should go check out his works.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm going to be honest with you folks. Like, I was a little bit of an elitist prick before I started reading these books, where I like looked at the concept of like web serial, like self-publish, and I was kind of like, that can't be good. That was wrong of me. And he's a fantastic writer. And the thing about it is, because it's not published and because he's writing it online, a lot of the stuff is like, I don't want to call it first drafty, because like that's not doing it the justice it deserves. But like, I think it shows that it's a testament of the skill he has, that this is like him just like writing and publishing without going through an editor and an editing process, and it's as good as it is. So one day when Wildbow is a published author, it's going to be wild to see what his books look like with that whole editing process behind them. It's just because he's that good.
Right.
But to answer the first part of the question, I think we would both absolutely love to interview Stephen King. I don't think that's going to happen. Like, I'll tell you what, if anyone is listening to this podcast right now and has an in with Stephen King's publicist, please let me know.
Yeah.
And we will try to make that happen. King does not give a lot of interviews in general, like even to big outlets. He does not give a lot of interviews. He doesn't like doing interviews that much. He'll do them when he needs to or when he has to, like for press for a book or something, but he doesn't like doing it very much. And he's an old man. He doesn't want to talk on the phone for hours. But I would love to interview him.
Yeah.
I would absolutely love to.
Right. I can definitely think of some fun questions that I would want to ask already,
Yeah. And you're not even done yet. Just you wait.
Yeah.
So I would love to interview him. If we can swing that, you guys will be the first to know about it. But the odds of that happening are not great. We're a small little baby podcast. There are Stephen King podcasts much bigger than ours that haven't been able to land Stephen King yet. So maybe he'll just like ours the best, and that's why, right? That's how it's gonna work.
Yeah. I mean, you can't make it happen if you don't try, right? So
right. I mean, I never thought we'd be able to interview Wildbow, and
right. Yeah,
that happened.
That was I still don't believe that happened, honestly, but
it was very cool.
Yeah.
Next up, we have a question from Sweet Jumps, who starts off by saying some super nice things about us. So thank you so much, Sweet Jumps. Then they ask, I know this is quite cynical, but I'm genuinely intrigued by the answer, as your podcast is overwhelmingly positive about the series in general. What gripes or things you do not like about the series, or things you do not, I can't read. What gripes or things you do not like about the series so far? Any bugbears that annoy you or you wish King had done differently? Matt, how about you?
No, like honestly, nothing comes to mind. I don't really like, if I'm enjoying something, I don't keep a list of things that I don't like,
Sure.
If I wasn't enjoying it, then I would absolutely have that list ready at hand. I mean, I like even like sort of like scouring my mind, trying to think like what do I wish was different. No, I mean, I think, one thing that I think about when I think about the series as a whole is that The Gunslinger is such a different book from all the other books so far.
Yeah.
That, and this is almost like a meta level criticism, just to say, like, I feel like a lot of people might be turned off by the way The Gunslinger is written. Like, it's Roland is not likable. He kills the kid. Super downer. What are you doing to me, Stephen King? Why did you make me read this book? I give up on The Dark Tower. Like, I can imagine so many people not making it past The Gunslinger. And of course I made it past because I was, fairly confident from knowing how into it you are. Like, okay, it goes in fun directions. But that's such a strange book that like, if I have a criticism, it's like, I wish The Gunslinger were a little bit a little bit more fun, maybe, or a little bit like it sucked you in a little bit more. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it does a really bad job of selling what The Dark Tower is as a series. And I love the book, and I grow to love the book each time I read it. But I do totally agree that there are people that bounce off the series because they read that book first, and they get a false impression of what the writing is like, what the story is like, what the story is doing. I agree with that. And I would never say like King rewrite the book to make it more in line with everything else. I mean, he kind of did that already. He changed stuff in his re-released version, but it was not like he didn't change the entire style of the writing, and he didn't change the way the characters are depicted and the shittiness that is Roland Deschain. Yeah, no, I mean, I totally get that. I totally get that. And yeah, I mean, people in the past, listeners that didn't quite like our show as much, have given us crap for the fact that we're like overwhelmingly positive about the things that we're diving deep into. And I mean, like, that's a conscious choice that we make, because like, I just don't think it'd be fun to listen to someone shit all over something. Like, I'm sure I could come up with some bad things to say. Like, I still actually on this reread do not like King's choice to hide the true identity of the wolves from us. I don't like the way he did that. I don't think it works in the end. I think we kind of tried to grasp for a good in-universe reason for why it happened that way. And I like the things that we came up with, and it made me like it a little bit better, but I'm still just not a fan of it. I think it could have been done. Yeah. I think it could have had a more tied into the narrative reason for why it was withheld. Yeah. And it just wasn't. So I don't love that, but yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I don't want to shit all over. I love these books, and I don't think it's fun to listen to people shit on things.
It's just always more productive to ask like what am I missing, rather than how did the author fuck up, right? Like, because maybe they did, right? Maybe they did fuck up, but maybe they didn't, and you're missing something, and you're just giving up an opportunity to learn and understand something on a deeper level if you don't bother to ask.
100%. Yeah. Cool. It was a good question, though. I like the question.
I don't normally turn on that part of my brain for these podcasts. So, A Man of Zimmer says, "What do I think the significance of 19 is?"
Ooh, Matt, what's 19?
Well, I mean, there's the whole thing where like he started writing the series when he was 19, and it was like a very important age for him for some reason. I don't know why it was an important age for him. I don't know why I even know that sentence of information. Maybe it's not true. Anyway, I mean, like the intro to the reformatted book is called like On Being 19. Okay, so that's probably where that's coming from. But then I
told you not to read it, but you saw the title that said On Being 19.
Yeah, I think I saw the title, and then I maybe heard him like say the first sentence, which was like, "Being 19 is important," and then I stopped. I don't remember. This was months ago. I don't know. I mean, that's my best guess. It could be more. I mean, at this point, I feel like it's more than that, but that's my best guess.
Cool. Cool. All right. Next, we have Unplugged Gem, who says, "If you could jump into Roland's timeline at any point of his life and participate in the events occurring, when would it be and why?" That's a good question.
Goodness.
I would want, oddly enough, I would want to see the Battle of Jericho Hill and the fall of the final gunslingers. I don't know why, because that seems like a really super depressing time to go to. But I think like what jumps into my head is seeing Gilead of old and seeing what it was like, and then seeing the ways in which it was lost feel like the place I want to go to.
Yeah, I think that was close to where my head went. Basically, just seeing old timey world, old timey either Magus or Gilead. Yeah.
Magus would be fun. I loved in Wizard and Glass the way he depicted Magus as this quiet but
beautiful,
beautiful like lost town of a part of a world that just doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, it's great. Until we found it in the Calla. It still exists. There it is.
Yep.
Sorta.
All right. Next question is from Harvey the Wonderham, who says, which to me specifically, which of your unresolved questions are you most looking forward to seeing answered? I want to see where Susanna went through the door.
Okay.
Most urgently and immediately. Yeah.
That's good answer. Good answer. All right. Next up, we have Luke V, who says, after finishing Wolves of the Calla, I am interested in hearing from each of you what part got you the most. For me, the Calla's twins being taken away and made root struck hardest for me, as I have a pair of twin girls that just turned 1. You can imagine the pain and horror I felt anytime the story goes into detail on what happened to the twins of the town. This also probably goes without saying, but I would assume the twin stuff wouldn't have affected me as much if I had read this book before my girls were born. I recall it was mentioned on the show before that Matt has children and Scott does not, so I'm interested in hearing if certain aspects of the story affected you both in different ways. Matt, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. Yeah, I think that at different times we've definitely acknowledged, like, or at least I've acknowledged that, like, ever since I had kids, all of the, kids stuff in fiction hits me like 10 times as hard. And I definitely was able to put myself into the position, of a character like Tien here, where I really felt the empathy there, and also, like I've said, the feeling of like, well, but if we fight, then I could lose, you could lose all your kids, and that's even worse, right? Like, it's this utterly horrible kind of dilemma, kind of a Sophie's Choice situation almost in a certain framing, yeah, like that stuff works on me really well. And yeah, congratulations on your twins. My kids are like 4, 6, and 8, so they're getting on in years.
Gosh, yeah, they're getting old. I remember when the 4-year-old was born. That was 4 years ago. Wow.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean,
gosh,
I remember when the 8-year-old was born, and it only occurred to me recently that was 8 years ago, because she's 8, and that's how time works. So yeah, I
mean, for me, I'm in this really weird spot right now where I do not have kids, but my wife is 4 months pregnant right now with our first child. I have a son coming in March. So reading this book, for most of the time reading this book, I think all the time, actually, I was aware of that fact. And it was only a few weeks ago that we learned it was a boy. And so the stuff with Slightman and Benny really hit for me different this time through, because this is this guy who is entirely motivated, or at least is telling himself he's entirely motivated by saving his child, his son. And I obviously, I haven't met my son yet, and I have not fully made that bond with him, but I could feel that. And I'm thinking about this a lot. I'm thinking about what it's going to be like to be a father. And I'm already having the stressors and the fear of, like, he's growing inside my wife's stomach right now. And I'm like, oh, there's a billion different things that can go wrong in this whole process. And you're worried about all of them at the same time, being like, just let nature do its thing. Don't worry about it. I could totally see. And I think I empathized with Slightman in a way that I've never have in the past, because I've already felt the fear of I could lose my son, and he's a 4-month-old fetus. Yeah. So it's a really weird, it was a really weird time for me to be reading this book.
Yeah.
So Benny's death fucking wrecked me this time around. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that part all hit me pretty solid. I mean, yeah, it's all in there. It's all the pulling on the specific vulnerabilities that parents have. So yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Next question from Daniel M. They ask, am I planning on becoming a constant reader? And am I allowed to read more King while we are going through the last 2 books? I don't think I've ever told you weren't allowed to read something. Well, I guess I've been assuming not, because I don't want to, like, accidentally read a book where it's like Eddie Dean shows up or something, and then it would be like, okay, now I know more information that I don't want to know,
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is, ask me.
Yeah.
If you want to read a King book, just say, Scott, can I read The Shining? And then I'll say, yeah, read The Shining.
Okay. Yeah.
Or I'll say, no, don't read The Stand yet. Or
honestly, like,
don't read Insomnia.
To answer the question as asked, like, we read so much for the book club that I don't have, like, a ton of extra slots to just be like, I'm just going to read like 100 Stephen King books. But I do really want to start reading his books, so I'm going to have to make that work somehow.
Yeah. We'll get there.
They also ask if either of us have read Drew Hayes's books. He wrote the Superpowered series, which is a bit like if My Hero Academia and Harry Potter had a love child. There's also a Fred the Vampire Accountant series. So apparently, yeah.
I have not read these. Have you?
No. I've heard of Superpowers, and I've heard someone comparing it to Worm in the Parahumans books, but I'm not sure. Like
positively.
Yeah, I think the discussion of it was that the Superpowers is a fun take.
Cool. Well, that makes me want to read it. Okay. Next up, we have Rebecca B, who asks a couple questions. First, what is your favorite relationship in the series so far, and why? And Rebecca gives us 3 examples: Eddie and Susan, Jake and Oy, Roland and Death. Matt, what's your favorite relationship in the series?
Yeah, Roland and Ka. I mean, probably Eddie and Susanna, but like I think Jake and Roland is a close second, or maybe a tie.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer. I love Jake and Roland and that complicated father-son relationship a whole bunch.
Yeah, cool.
But I do love Jake and Oy as well. Oy and Scott is my favorite relationship in the series.
It's just you can only say so much about relationships where the text doesn't really give us a ton of information.
Sure. Rebecca's second question is, what has been your favorite place the quartet has visited, whether it be in their travels or through stories told to and by them about the past?
I was going to say
Magus, Gilead.
Yeah, I mean, favorite in terms of like interesting. Like I think like Lud and like
sure
the Wasteland, that whole section was the my favorite in terms of like, oh, this is awesome, you know.
You know what I kind of liked? Like 1970s New York City.
Yeah.
Like I think there's something about that version of New York City. I mean, it was like much dirtier, much less safe than it is now. But there's something, I don't know, like I think it's just because I watch so many damn 70s movies that take place in New York, and they show like the way they shoot New York City is just fascinating. And so whenever our characters are walking through 70s New York, I get a very distinct feel in my head, and I kind of want to visit that place. Yeah,
there's something very romantic about even the flaws.
Sure. Yeah. Rebecca B also mentioned something that so last week's episode was not on YouTube. And if you're listening to this right now on YouTube, you now know that our problem is solved. Basically, our host that pushes our podcasts out has a feed that pushes it to YouTube and makes a video and does all that stuff automatically. It randomly broke last week. I don't know why. None of our podcasts from last week appeared on YouTube. I fixed it now, and so all the future ones will appear, but for some reason that script that it runs won't rerun after the episode has been published for some stupid reason. So we're going to have to manually make a video, like take the audio and convert it into a video file and upload it to YouTube. We're going to do that. It's going to happen last week's episode will eventually be on YouTube if you listen via the YouTube playlist. It's going to take a few more days. It'll probably be done by the end of the week, but sorry about that, everyone. I don't know why it happened. But our podcast is available just everywhere else. So sorry about that, Rebecca, and anyone else that was looking for the episode. Don't know what happened.
Yeah. All right. April S asks, they say, hi, all gunslingers. And they ask about J.R.R. Tolkien. They say, I have only read The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I want to read more Tolkien. And as Matt is such a huge fan, I'd be interested in knowing what he would recommend I check out. I mean, I did read the Silmarillion, and if you really are interested, then you should definitely check out the Silmarillion. But it's not written the same way as the other books.
No, it's a tough read.
Yeah,
it's fascinating, and I love it to death, but it is not an easy read.
And then there's other stuff, like I've read, like I think there's some publication that contains his letters. Man, I don't remember what the name of it is. It may be just like the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien or discussion of the letters or excerpts from the letters or something like that. But honestly, I don't think that brought me a ton of insight.
Yeah,
I don't know.
So my recommendation, obviously, I think that you should read the Silmarillion, and I think you should read it and listen along with an excellent podcast that has been going on forever called The Prancing Pony, where they went through the Silmarillion chapter by chapter, and I think it really helps you, like, because that it's very dense, it's very thick. There's a lot of names and a lot of references, because it's basically written as a mythological text about the creation myth of the world, and so it's written that way, and so it is. It's rough.
Yeah.
But a podcast really helps with that.
There's also another podcast called The Tolkien Professor, where I would actually recommend going like to the beginning of the podcast, which was like years and years ago, and like just reading him going through certain specific, very old Tolkien stories, like
Leaf by Niggle is a really good one.
Leaf by Niggle, and then there's another one about yeah, it's been too long. I'm sorry. I'm letting you down as a Tolkien fan, but basically he goes through these other stories that are not really part of Lord of the Rings, but you can see the DNA of what is going to become Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth and all of that. And it's very cool. And the guy who does the podcast is, I'm pretty sure, like literally a professor of literature who knows. Yeah,
and I think since he started that podcast, they've made like a whole school where you could for studying Tolkien and other fantasy literature, which is insane.
That's awesome
and wonderful.
So that's another recommend in terms of podcast to check out.
I think one thing nonfiction wise, his essay on fairy stories is really, really great. And basically what happened is, like, Tolkien read something about how like fantasy and fairy stories are not like a legitimate genre, and he got really mad and basically said fuck you, and wrote this essay that, like, you can tell it's kind of dripping with his anger at an, like, not in a, like in a very proper British way. It's really wonderful, and I think it really sets out and defines a lot of his terms and the way he looks at things. I think it's where he really gets into the idea of secondary creation. It's where he really gets into the idea of eucatastrophe, and he really talks about, like, what the importance of fairy stories, the importance of fantasy, the importance of genre as a form of literature. It's not that long a read. It's very well written. It's Tolkien. It's really good.
Speaking of Tolkien, I'm actually reading The Hobbit to my kids right now. And
that's awesome.
And it's going pretty great, actually. At least one of them is really into it, which is a good batting average in terms of books with my kids. So
awesome. Yeah, and I think his son, like, published a bunch of other stuff besides the Silmarillion. Like, I think, like, Beren and Luthien just came out like a few years ago.
Interesting.
Right?
I don't know. That might have passed me by, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's all stuff that was not completed. That like Christopher Tolkien, his son, who passed away not too long ago, basically spent his entire life, like, cataloging and organizing the insane amount of stuff his dad had written but never published, and he he made it his life's work to collect it and publish the part of it that he thought was publishable, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that stuff's out there. I haven't read any of that stuff, but
yeah, me neither. Cool.
Maybe one day.
Yeah.
Good question, though.
Yeah.
You hit the big ones: The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. You're doing great.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean that's. Those are all that I would insist someone read. Beyond that, you're just being a super fan. So
yeah, we do not brook people saying bad things about the Lord of the Rings here at Doof Media.
That's correct.
All right, final question from Steve D. Steve says, 1999 was a glorious year for fiction. If Stephen King was writing wolves today, any predictions on what weapons the wolves would have?
Something
MCU, right?
Yeah, they have an Infinity Gauntlet or a hammer that they could. Oh yeah, they definitely have a hammer that they could throw, and it would smash into you, and then it would fly back to their hand.
Yeah, definitely,
100%.
But what else, though?
Probably
what else
still lightsabers.
Yeah, that's sadly still lightsabers. Yes, probably not a Harry Potter reference, especially not in 2020. I don't know what is the modern day Harry Potter. It really is just MCU, right? MCU is pretty all encompassing.
Yeah,
there's probably be like a Fortnite reference, right?
Yeah,
that might even be too, like, opaque for like, even if Stephen King was a younger man than 2020, I don't even know if he would totally understand what the hell Fortnite is.
Yeah, and I can't even really think of like a super characteristic Fortnite weapon, you know?
No.
Like it could be one of the various melee weapons, but
who the fuck knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm too old for that shit. Incomprehensible.
Yeah. I don't know. I think a Thor hammer that returns to your hand is a good answer, though.
Yeah, it's a great answer. It's so funny that in 1999 there was still a Marvel reference, but it was like Marvel Comics, and it was like really unclear because.
And it's Doctor Doom, the one character in the shitty Fantastic Four movies that they keep trying to make happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think like for a 2003 Stephen King to pick Doctor Doom, I think made a lot of sense because like the Fantastic Four are like the founding family of Marvel Comics, and Doctor Doom is their like big villain. So I think that's a great assumption to make, but it's just like the reality of how Marvel sold the rights to their films made it so their like main characters are different from what anyone would have expected.
Yeah, well, exactly right. Like I've said repeatedly, like I would always just roll my eye at the idea of Thor. It's like Thor.
It's really? Such a stupid idea.
It's such a stupid idea, and he's like my favorite character by head and shoulders my favorite character.
All right, what if one of the MCU heroes is just the god?
It's just Thor.
He's just a Norse god.
Yeah. And then you're gonna love him because of Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah, it's amazing. God, what a miracle the MCU is.
I know.
All right, that is it. Thank you so much for everyone who sent in those questions. I really love doing these mailbags, and we're going to be doing another one in not too long, Matt, because book 6 is one of the shortest books in the series. We're only going to be doing this across 6 episodes, so we'll be back in a month and a half to do another overview episode. But next week, we will properly begin Book 6, Songs of Susanna. The book is structured a little bit differently from the other books, which you'll see soon, Matt. But basically, next week, we'll be discussing stanzas 1 through 4 of Book 6, Songs of Susanna. So read stanzas 1 through 4, and then join us next week to talk about them and get into this book. I can't wait for you to find out what happens, Matt.
Stanzas, eh?
Yeah, like it's a song.
I get it. Anyway,
Susanna.
Yep. Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit, reddit.com/r/doofmedia is maybe the best place to communicate with us.
Yeah, no formal discussion question this week, but just chat. Just chat with each other and say Heil and thank you, Sai. There you go.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week for a new discussion question. But if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we got 2 books left, folks. It's really time to do it. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts, at least normally on YouTube. This one will be on YouTube. Last week's will be on YouTube eventually, but it's all those other places as well.
It's not our fault. And if you like our show and you want to support it, consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. And special thanks this week to new patrons Bidoofs, Adrian O, Jason H, and Brendan F, and new Doof Warrior Christopher A. Thank you so much and welcome all of you. And I hope you enjoy the cool stuff that you find on the Patreon.
Yeah, so much bonus stuff. Christopher A is going to get to pick a movie for us to watch in the future. So I can't wait to see what Christopher has for us. And the rest of you get to vote in a bunch of stuff. Get access to our Discord. Just a bunch of cool things.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for everyone that supports us. We are fully patron funded. So you're paying to keep us afloat and to keep us in books and movies and equipment, because I think I need a new microphone soon.
Yeah.
And where am I going to get the money for that?
That's right. And if you're curious, you can just go to patreon.com/doofmedia and see what those reward tiers are and what's offered, because there's a bunch of stuff on there.
I'm gonna stop promising the Stand By Me bonus episode because we've had some scheduling hiccups that have prevented that from coming out soon. But I did schedule it for reals this time. So it is going to happen, and that'll be a bonus episode for some of our patrons. So I will let you know when that actually comes out. This is the last time I'm going to mention it until we actually sit down and record it. I promise.
Cool. Makes sense.
But it's coming. So yeah, thank you to the folks that are donating to us. And if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay as well. There are still tons of ways to help us out. Share it on Facebook groups. Share the podcast on r/books threads. Share it on Stephen King fan groups. Maybe just share it with Stephen, and so we can interview him. Just, hey, Stephen, do you know what a podcast is?
Yeah.
Stephen? Of course, you can always help us by leaving a rating and review on your podcatcher of choice. This week's Spotlight review comes from Rocket Girl 75, who gives us 5 stars and says, a scholarly, smart deep dive into the Dark Tower series. After my 5th reread of the series, complete with stops to revisit Salem's Lot and other references, I was jonesing for more, and these guys deliver. They're well-read, funny, and most importantly, humble and self-effacing. Thank God. That's true. That's true. We don't know what the fuck we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm glad that comes across.
Yes. Turtle save us from yet another pair of know-it-all dudes opining the great truths of the Kingverse. Yeah, I don't know any great truths. I like it.
Yes, I hope I never come across as thinking I know great truths.
Yes, me too. The format of constant reader versus newbie works brilliantly, and I hope we hear many more King podcasts from these two. My only complaint is that I'm finally caught up and have to wait a whole week between episodes. I'm so sorry, Rocket Girl. They say, P.S. I occasionally re-listen to Idris Elba's Gunslinger recitation and may have squealed loudly during the preview. Okay, good. I'm not alone on that one. That's the movie's bad, but that part is good.
Yeah, I think even I can watch the preview and just be like, I can imagine that a good movie was made from this, and then never go farther than that.
Except we have to go farther than that, because the last thing we're doing on the show, Matt, is we're watching the Dark Tower movie.
I know.
But that's not until April, so don't worry about it now. All right, folks, thank you again for all the reviews and the ratings. They really do help us. And that is it for us. That is it for us, and that is it for Wolves of the Calla. We'll see you back here next week as we begin the penultimate novel in the Dark Tower series, Song of Susanna. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.